I'm a self-taught senior developer who got hired 4 months after writing his first line of code. 1 year later, I got hired as a senior engineer during a massive layoff period. Here are my secrets to getting hired with over 200,000 big tech layoffs happening right now. The first thing you're going to want to do is learn a JavaScript framework. Which one doesn't really matter, but I recommend React. React is by far used by the most companies, which means if you learn it, you have the best shot of getting hired. Whichever one you decide, here's a few things you need to know. JavaScript frameworks use components, which make your app modular. All that means is you can copy parts of the app and update parts of it without needing to refresh the whole page. They make building apps much easier and faster, which is why so many companies use them. To be honest, the best way to learn is to read the documentation. But if that feels a little bit overwhelming, don't worry. Start with a free intro course on YouTube, and once you get the hang of it a little bit, then you can move on to the documentation. Once you've mastered React or Vue, you're going to want to, actually scratch that, you're going to need to learn TypeScript. Knowing TypeScript makes you stand out as an expert to companies. And it's actually super easy, at least compared to React or Vue. But wait, what is TypeScript? All TypeScript does is cut down on errors in JavaScript using something called static typing. It's compatible with all JavaScript frameworks, and you should learn it with React or Vue, whichever one you chose. Overall, it makes it easier for other developers to understand your code. It's kind of a no-brainer. Stack Overflow's 2023 developer survey says 43% of developers are using TypeScript and 66% of developers are using JavaScript. But we can assume that the 43% of developers using TypeScript counts towards the 66% of developers using JavaScript because, well, TypeScript uses JavaScript. Don't worry too much about the math behind it. All you need to know is most companies hiring JavaScript developers also want them to know TypeScript. And if you're thinking that's a stretch, here's a poll from the #1 tech community in the world. 81% agree you're more likely to get hired knowing TypeScript than just plain React. As someone who coaches developers all the time, I agree. Now, for everybody's favorite part, it's time to grind LeetCode. I don't want to say it, and I wish it weren't true, but it's hard to get hired without knowing data structures and algorithms. Even though you don't use them much on the job, companies will still test you on it. Before I got my job that put me at $220,000 a year, I decided to do 5 LeetCode problems every day for 3 months. It was a grind, but I believed it would be worth it. I ended up at 150 when I was hired, and in my experience, that's kind of a sweet spot. To be honest, I don't use them a ton on the job, but I don't regret it because it got me hired. I also feel like it made me a better problem solver, which really is all a developer is. If you want an easy way to get better at LeetCode problems, here's a workflow that helps me go way faster and make way less mistakes, especially in the interview. There's really only 4 steps. First, figure out what we know. Second, figure out what we want. And third, ask clarifying questions. I recommend you do this step even when you're practicing so that it's a habit when you get to the interview. And fourth, whiteboard it. Once you finish that, pick your language and solve. When I was learning, I used Python and JavaScript, but I recommend you pick the language you feel most comfortable with and get that down packed. And if you're worried about what difficulty to pick, I recommend you change difficulties in this exact order. Once you complete that, do medium and hard and mix in easy as you feel like it. It doesn't really matter as long as you start with easy and cover all the levels. I recommend you keep a document to cover what problems you solve each day. That way you can feel good about your progress and come back to problems after you solve them. I went back and did each problem a week and a month later, and I'd count that towards my daily 5. For me, doing that helped me see how far I was coming and reinforce the strategies I was learning were working. At the start, it's probably not going to be fun, but about 2 weeks in, I started to enjoy it. After you've done at least 20 LeetCode problems, it's time for your final boss. That's right, I'm talking about system design. Like TypeScript, system design is something juniors usually overlook. I'm going to show you exactly how to learn it as a junior, without feeling overwhelmed. Basically, system design is what makes your app work when it has tons of users. All system design is putting together services so our backend can handle a lot of requests as efficient as possible without our servers crash. That seems like a lot. Don't worry. I'm going to explain everything. This part is going to get a little in the weeds. The building blocks of a system are a virtual private server, a database, and usually an object store. A VPS is pretty much a computer on the cloud, just like the one you code on. Typically, you'll use it to receive requests from your front end, get some info from your database, and then send it back. I use EC2 for all my virtual private servers, but you can really host them wherever you want. We're going to need to store our users' info somewhere, and that's where databases come in. A database allows us to store things like users' name, email, password, and settings. Technically, you can host your database on a virtual private server, but that means you're gonna have to do a lot of upkeep. That's why I use RDS, which handles that for you. But what if a user needs to upload a profile photo or pics of their vacation? That's where object stores come in. As a rule of thumb, anytime you're storing files, object stores are your best bet. Technically, you can store files on a VPS as well, but it's much more expensive, and object stores are designed to store files efficiently. Amazon S3 is my go-to object store because it's super easy to use. Before you solve system design problems on your own, I highly recommend you host a small app using EC2, RDS, and S3. System design is a lot more involved, and to master it, there's a lot to learn. But those basics will take you very far. When I started, that would have made 0 sense to me. But practice makes perfect, and with time, you can learn to do it in your sleep.